One of the most brilliant knights of the Middle Ages was Henry Percy, who gained the nickname Henry Hotspur. He was a thorn in the side of the Scots and also the French, and his name was given to him due to the skill on the battlefield he had as an always ready and quick commander who would inspire his forces. He was part of a noble family in England and was a key part of the deposition of a medieval king, but one battle would be too many for Henry Hotspur. Following the Battle of Shrewsbury, he was posthumously executed after he fell on the battlefield, and his remains were treated terribly. But what is the story of this brilliant knight, and why was he treated so poorly in death? Join us today as we look at the brutal execution of the remains of Henry Hotspur, and remember as always to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Henry Percy was born on the 20th of May 1364 at either Alnwick Castle or Warkworth Castle in Northumberland, in the north of England. He was the eldest son of Henry Percy, the first Earl of Northumberland, and Margaret Neville. As a young man at the age of 13, he was knighted by King Edward II, along with the future King Richard II and Henry IV. It was clear he belonged to a rather well-off and prominent noble medieval family that was linked to the royal court. At the age of 16, he was in Ireland with the Earl of March, and then he travelled 3 years later to Prussia. He became the Warden of the East March around 1384, and then the following year he was part of Richard II's entourage as the English ventured into the Scottish borders. Whilst raiding along the border and fighting the Scots, he gained the nickname Hotspur or Hotspur because of his ferocious fighting tactics. He was a brilliant knight and he was a clearly gifted military commander and was valued by the kings of England at the time. He had been brought up in this way and was raised to be a military leader. But then he was sent to France during the 100 Years' War to try and strengthen Calais and the soldiers that were garrisoned there. He also led raids into neighbouring French areas and settlements, and his reputation continued to grow. He then was in control of a naval fleet that was sent to try and relieve the siege of Brest, and for this and his various other campaigns he was made a Knight of the Garter. He was knighted at the age of 24, which shows you how much skill and experience he had on the battlefields of Europe at such a young age. He then returned to England and resumed protecting the East March, and he was then involved in the Battle of Otterbourne against the second Earl of Douglas. Here he was captured, but Douglas realised his worth, and instead of slaughtering Hotspur, he was then held for ransom, and quickly the king paid 7,000 marks for the safe return of Henry Percy. This was a huge sum of money, but then the English king could not have his main commander slaughtered and executed. But following this, the reputation of Henry Hotspur continued to thrive and grow. He was sent to Cyprus on an early diplomatic mission before the age of 30, and then he became the lieutenant of the Duchy of Aquitaine to help John of Gaunt, who was a duke. He came back to England in January 1395 and raided in Ireland with Richard II, but then returned to France where he was fighting in Calais. Through his skill on the battlefield and as a commander, he was given a huge amount of wealth and favour from the king, and Richard II rewarded him handsomely. He was married to Lady Elizabeth Mortimer, and together the couple had 2 children. Henry Percy would become his heir, and also they had a daughter named Elizabeth, who became the Countess of Westmoreland. But despite being clearly close with Richard II, he decided to at some point turn against the king. Henry Bolingbroke challenged Richard II in his legitimacy, and along with the former Archbishop of Canterbury Thomas Arundel, he began a military campaign in which he began to steal land from people who opposed him. Henry claimed it was his intention to reclaim the rights he had as a Duke of Lancaster, but he gained some support to challenge for the crown, as he did have royal blood. He had enough support to have himself declared King Henry IV, and he imprisoned Richard II, and was then coronated on the 13th of October 1399 at Westminster Abbey. But Henry Hotspur supported Henry in this rebellion, and he joined forces with his father at Doncaster, and together the Percys and Bolingbroke marched south and were involved in the rebellion. Following Henry IV being crowned, Henry Hotspur and his family were then rewarded handsomely with more land and titles, and other important roles at court. The new king also clearly valued Henry Hotspur's skill on the battlefield, and under him he was involved in a number of key military campaigns and operations in the east, and also towards Wales. He was appointed the High Sheriff of Flintshire, and saw more action towards Scotland. Inside of Wales, though, he was suffering after Owen Glendower's uprising, and it was putting him under a lot of pressure, and his men were struggling to maintain order and put it down. But then in March 1402, Percy was made the Royal Lieutenant of North Wales, and in autumn of that year he was yet again fighting the Scots. He and his father, along with some Scottish earls, fought against the Scottish army at the Battle of Hamilton Hill, and after they were victorious they managed to seize a prize prisoner in the form of Archibald Douglas, the 4th Earl of Douglas. But despite being friendly with the new king, Henry IV, the Percys had shown themselves to be turncoats and people who could not always be trusted. They became disillusioned with the king and had many arguments with him. They were angry as the king failed to pay wages to them, as they were defending the north border, and the king was favourable towards the Scottish Earl, and the king also demanded that the Percys should give over their Scottish prisoners. There were many more reasons why the Percys were angry, including the lack of leadership in Wales, but because of this the Percys, who were very powerful, rose up in the summer of 1403. They took up weapons against the king and were colluding with the French rebel Owen Glendower. Henry Percy said the king was running a tyrannical government, and he wanted to bring it down. His uncle Thomas Percy, the Earl of Worcester, joined him, and they marched to Shrewsbury to fight against the Royalist army. But when they got to Shrewsbury on the 21st of July 1403, they met a huge army and faced the king. The Battle of Shrewsbury erupted and was very fierce, and there were a number of casualties on both sides, but the main casualty was Henry Hotspur. There are differing accounts of his death, and one record states that whilst he led his men in the fight rashly penetrating the enemy, Hotspur was unexpectedly cut down, by whose hand not known. Other accounts say he was struck in the face by an arrow which hit him when he opened his visor for a better view of the battlefield. But this was not the end of the story for Henry Hotspur. Despite lying dead on the battlefield, his body was taken to the king. Henry allegedly wept at it, and his body was then taken by Thomas Neville, the 5th Baron Furnivall, to Shropshire. But there were rumours that Percy was still alive, and the king wanted to put these to bed for once and for all, and the corpse of Henry Hotspur was dug up. It was said he had it exhumated and displayed, and it was propped upright between 2 millstones in the marketplace of Shrewsbury. As Hotspur's body was lying there, it was then beheaded, and Percy's head was cut off, and it was then sent to York, where it was placed above one of the city's gates. His body was then cut into 4 quarters, before they were sent to London, Newcastle, Bristol and Chester. They were then displayed before they were shockingly sent to his wife. His remains were then buried at York Minster, and he was declared a traitor. But Henry Percy, or Henry Hotspur, was a skilled and gifted military commander and leader who struck fear into the hearts of many people across Britain and Europe. He was known for his quick thinking and decisive actions, but following his death his remains were treated terribly. His posthumous execution brought shame on his legacy and reputation, and his remains were displayed to send a clear reminder not to rebel against King Henry IV. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.